Hey guys, what's up? Cosplay and fantasy has been like a really recent thing because I don't remember cosplay being a thing in the past more than like 10, 20 years ago. And I think this is such a recent thing. I think it's got to do with the explosion of the popularity of fantasy and the way that fantasy reaches a lot of different people, because fantasies are just so different across the board. There's like the manga fantasy, the anime, the movie fantasies, the books, and the comic books, and I think that with the rise of the Comic-Cons, which never were that popular in the past, if you heard any stories about anyone that used to go to Comic-Cons in the 90s or something, or in the 80s, it wasn't really popular. There was like a few people sitting around with like comic books and trading them back and forth, and that was it. That was Comic-Con, and now it's a pop cultural event that gets sold out with like 20,000 people there that weekend. And when you go in there, it's just crowded with so many people. And a lot of the people go in there cosplaying. Now, cosplaying is great. I'd love to cosplay, but the thing is about cosplaying and going to Comic-Con is you can't get everything done. Like, you can't do all the things you want to do in the Comic-Con and cosplay at the same time. Because if you go and cosplay in a Comic-Con or any kind of convention, whether that's a fantasy convention or what, because there's basically comic conventions, game conventions, or general fantasy conventions like Dragon Cons and stuff like that, or Space Cons or whatever it is, and basically if you dress up like really in a snazzy way in a cosplay, you would probably spend the whole time there getting your picture taken and people asking you to pose with them and take a picture of you, and while I think that's really cool, if you really want to get like famous or something, or internet famous, or a little bit famous, I've seen people getting famous, like, who are just getting famous from cosplay. Those models and those girls that just dress up and you've never heard of them before, and they came out there and they're doing all this cool cosplay, and then, you hear about them because of that. You hear about them because of cosplay. You might actually see them at the Comic-Cons and stuff like that. And they're like surrounded by all their sort of like people that are in their whole business niche, because it's a whole business. It's not just like getting dressed up. They sell calendars, they sell pictures themselves, they appear, they actually make costumes for people. And now to actually get a costume made, for one thing, there's only two ways to do it. Make it yourself, which is like, you need like a few years of experience to do it properly. You could do it, but it'll like look a little bit probably like amateurish at first, or, but after a few years of doing it, you'll probably get the hang of it and make some amazing costumes. Or you can buy it from someone. And I don't see these costumes being very cheap, because this is how people make their livelihood, by making costumes for other people. And it's probably about a few $1,000s at least, because these things take a long time to make. A lot of work, take a long time. Anything on YouTube where it's like, we made this costume and this is how long it took us to make this, or we're making this costume and here's how, they always show you like, yeah, we've been working on this thing for like, weeks and months and years, before we actually made it. And, even the ones that are like, know everything about how to make costumes still don't know everything about how to make costumes. They still have problems they have to fix. How do we make this sword look realistic? How do we make the shield light enough to carry? How do we make this helmet fit the person's head? Whatever it is. Now, there's a few different things. So basically, fantasy made cosplay famous, and cosplay makes fantasy famous, because for a lot of people, they see people in costume and then they get into the whole story of it, because they'll see like somebody, a model or just a person in the costume, and then they're like curious, oh, what story is that from? And then they get into the whole manga and the whole anime of it, or the whole movie of it, or the series, because they see someone in a cool costume and they're like, wow, that looks so cool. And then they follow that story after that. So cosplay and costumes, get people to follow the actual story, and the story gets people to dress in costumes for that story. It's usually, and it's done very like authentically. The people that dress up love that story. They're not dressing up and never heard of that story before. They're just like, oh, I just like how it looks. I'm sure there's people that do that. But I think a lot of people are really authentic with their cosplay. And it's like, if they dress up that way, they probably at least watched the movie or read the manga or watched the anime or watched the series or some degree of the series. They probably watched a few episodes of that show that they dressed up as, you know? So that's the thing. And I don't know, it's just such a great thing that even if fantasy doesn't appeal to everyone, I would say like the whole costume thing does appeal to a lot of people. And even people that have not been into fantasy get into the whole costume aspect of it. And inevitably they start diving into the whole fantasy rabbit hole thing where eventually, you know, they get into the fantasy stuff. And the thing is, it's like they get dressed up and then they meet other people who are dressed up and they see other people who are dressed and they're like, wow, that's such a cool costume. And then it's like, oh, it's from this series or it's from this movie or it's from this book or this comic or this animation or whatever it was. And people are like, wow, that's cool. And they get really, really curious about the whole animation thing. What I do think though, like, it's sort of like, you know, cosplay is a step up from just getting into costume. Like Halloween is, I remember like, Halloween used to be the only time that you would get dressed up in costume, either Halloween or a costume party. And costume parties almost never happen. I really haven't seen too many costume parties, but every year Halloween gets people dressed up in droves as their favorite story character, you know, like in the movie or whatever it is, as Jason or Halloween or some horror movie or some fantasy movie or whatever, or some kind of humorous thing. What's funny that if you go to like a Comic-Con and then watch the people with the Halloween costumes, the Comic-Con costumes are just so much better than the Halloween costumes. Halloween is like, you know, people try to make a good costume, but if all they can manage is to like, you know, turn into a robot because they brought a couple of cardboard boxes and they painted them and stuff like that, and it looks really, really amateurish, it's like, that's kind of like, you kind of expect seeing some of that at Halloween. You expect some great costumes, but you expect a lot of amateur costumes, because in Halloween, it's hard to actually find a costume to buy. Those freaking Halloween Halloween places that open up around Halloween, they don't have a big selection. Their costumes pretty much suck. I mean, they're okay a little bit, but they are a little bit pricey, and they don't necessarily, they're not that great. You know, they don't look that convincing. They look a little bit amateurish. Like anyone that's buying those costumes is like, yeah, I've bought those costumes and everything, but you know, I just think like they don't look that great. They don't fit everyone. They look amateurish. Yes, you can go into one of those stores and buy a little of this and a little of that, a little of these things, and then put a costume together, but you still have to do some work and put the costume together. If you can't really go to those stores and get a finished costume, and even if you do, and they've got the finished costumes, but even though they got the finished costumes, they're like, they don't look great. They look a little bit cheap. Even though they spent like 60 bucks, it still looks like they spent 60 bucks on a Halloween costume, whereas like a cosplay, you could spend, I don't even know how much they cost, like $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 for a costume that took a long time for a person that's talented and knows what they're doing to make, with a lot of experience, and can make a perfect costume that looks identical to, like, it's something that's like camera ready and exact and fits someone's proportions exactly, and like fits and is comfortable, and you can take it on and off, and it's just perfectly done, you know, with lights and smoke and all kinds of shit. And so what's cool about that is that like you get to actually dress up as your favorite character. And I think with cosplay, it got a lot of people to not only pay attention to the stories and the fantasy stories behind those costumes, but also to go to the Comic-Cons, either to wear those costumes themselves or to look at people that do wear those costumes. Like seriously, like why would you go to a Comic-Con convention or a fantasy convention or any convention that's like pop culture convention? A lot of the reasons people go is to see other people in costume. And why would people like bring their camera? Like most of the pictures you take is people in costume, you know, and it's cool. And what it does is it's sort of almost like a next level like fandom, basically. It's just like you can be a fan of something, but then if you dress up as that person that you're a fan of, or that character you're a fan of, now you're like really a fan of that character. Now you're like legit, like you know, that's sort of like an expression of fandom and stuff like that from those characters, you know? And I just like how, you know, it's nice that you're able to kind of celebrate your stories. And when you see other people in costumes, you can kind of relate with that. And you're like, hey, you like that series also, or you like that movie too, or, you know, whatever it is. And so like, you know, with people and fantasy and people dressing up in costumes, it's so cool. It's just like, it's an extra thing inside the celebration of we love this stuff. Because usually it's not going to be like just a series or a comic, or you probably like that kind of thing. You know, if you like some, like the Marvel series that they have on Netflix, you probably like a few of them, right? If you like those, if you like one thing, you probably like another. You know, if you like Iron Man, you'll probably like, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy or something like that, right? If you like one kind of fantasy, you probably like a different kind of fantasy that's really, really similar, you know? And so, yeah, and so like, you know, people just started like dressing as it, and it's just something that, it's just another way, it created another art form that's also fantasy. And I really love that, because it created the art form of getting dressed up as fantasy characters. And that art form was never there. Like, you know, people could not express their fandom in any way but, you know, to wear a t-shirt or something, or maybe some kind of button or something with that story on the t-shirt or something. But now you can, it's like, it's okay, and it's even accepted, and it's okay to dress up as that character. And it's even like really cool to dress up as that character. And people take your pictures and people say, wow, you got an amazing costume and everything like that. You know, and it sort of like integrates, it gives another reason for people to like fantasy, because most cosplay is for fantasy cosplay, you know, because you always get these fantasy characters. You don't really get too much non-fantasy, because cosplay is basically fantasy stories and fantasy manga, fantasy anime, like fantasy movies and stuff like that, even sci-fi movies and stuff like that, which is also like fantasy. It's sort of like an expression of fandom, and just an extra added expression that wasn't there before. And before, where you really couldn't express any kind of like cool fandom, this is like a cool way to actually celebrate a genre, a whole thing, a whole like fantasy genre, like a whole, what's like all of the different components that are in the convention, you know, all the different components that are in the Comic-Con, you know, all of everything that they put inside the convention, all of the pop culture, you know. And it's really cool that you can love something, you can like something, and then you see someone like dressed up as that character, you know, and you could basically take a picture with them. And that's really cool, because it's the closest thing you could probably get to really celebrating like your connection to a certain series or movie or book or comic or manga or anime or something like that. You know, you might not be able to get a picture with the actual actor or actress that plays that character, or even if it's a character's a robot or some kind of creature, you know, you probably won't be able to like take pictures with them, but you can take a picture with somebody who's cosplaying it. And honestly, like, if you like this series enough, if you like the story enough, you know, you could save your money and buy a costume and get someone to make one for you and have something and just show up in complete cosplay. And it doesn't just like change the experience of the people that look at the costumes. It changes the experience of how people celebrate their fandom and how people appear in their costumes. You know, it changes their experience. It's such a way that like, without it, the whole experience of the Comic-Con probably would not be as big. It really wouldn't, because there'd be a lot less to it, and it would be more of, oh, I'm going to this Comic-Con to look at art, to maybe buy comics, maybe buy, you know, like merch and clothing and stuff like that, or even like DVDs or games or things like that, or books or whatever, or like Blu-rays. You know, come to Comic-Cons to actually buy stuff and stuff. But this gives people a reason to come to Comic-Cons to look at all the cool people in the costumes, because seriously, that is one of the best things about Comic-Cons or any kind of conventions. You know, the people in cosplay and the pictures you get, maybe posing with them or them posing for you in the picture. The pictures you get are really, really cool. Like the pictures you get, it gives you another memory, and it's something that, interestingly enough, it also is something where it shows that the everyday person could also play as this character. You know, it's something that everyone can do. There's no one saying you can cosplay, you can't cosplay. It's open to everyone. It's inclusive. And the only thing you need to do is want to do it. You know, if you want to do it and you got like money, you can actually buy someone, you know, you can get someone to make a costume for you. If you want to do it, okay, maybe at first it starts to look like a little bit amateurish when people start doing those things, but then after a couple of years of being into it and really like following tutorials and practicing and making these costumes, they can make some really cool, acceptable costumes and then celebrate. In a way, it's just another way to celebrate. It's another way to party. It's a little bit like the next level from, you know, like a costume party or or Halloween. It's like, it's sort of so cool. It's like taking the best part of Halloween, the costume, and the best part of like pop culture, the fantasy, and putting it together and, you know, creating this like costume Halloween celebration of fantasy, you know? So that's what I think about that. Let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in another video later.